Welcome back to Shawn Thinking Out Loud. I'm Shawn Armstrong, and today we're talking about something that shouldn't need to be explained to grown adults in a republic, but here we are. Because apparently the country made it 250 years, built a constitution, fought wars, survived depressions, civil conflict, political corruption, foreign enemies, domestic lunacy, bad presidents, worse Congresses, activist courts, broken schools, incompetent bureaucrats, and enough stupid public commentary to qualify as a hostile act. And now we have to ask whether the average citizen even knows what the hell the 4th of July celebrates. Everybody wants freedom. Everybody wants rights. Everybody wants their opinion treated like sacred scripture. Everybody wants to run their mouth about democracy, fascism, tyranny, oppression, resistance, justice, equality, and whatever other word they found in a hashtag and decide to wear it like a medal. But a republic doesn't survive on opinions. A republic survives on citizens who know what the hell they're talking about. And that's the problem. This country wasn't built for stupid people. Now, before someone gets offended, which is apparently America's fastest growing indoor sport, let me clarify what I mean. I'm not saying the republic was built only for academics. I'm not saying only lawyers, historians, judges, professors, veterans, or political theorists get to participate. That would be nonsense. Some of the most historically ignorant people in this country have degrees hanging on the wall. I've seen people with graduate degrees explain the Constitution like they learned it from a cereal box. And I've seen mechanics, farmers, truck drivers, soldiers, welders, small business owners, and working class Americans show more understanding of liberty, duty, law, and government than people who got professionally educated into uselessness. So no, this is not about formal education. This is about civic seriousness. This is about whether you understand the country you claim to love. This is about whether you know the difference between liberty and license, because rights and preferences, between citizenship and consumption, between patriotism and party worship, between dissent and destruction, between constitutional government and mob emotion. Because those are not small differences. Those are the difference between a republic and a collapse with Wi-Fi. The current issue is simple. America just marked its 250th anniversary, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the anniversary of the moment this country formally told the British Crown that political authority doesn't flow downward from kings to subjects. It flows upwards from the consent of the governed. That was the point. That was the break. That was the revolution. And yet a shocking number of Americans couldn't identify what the 250th anniversary was actually commemorating. Think about that. Not some obscure treaty, not some forgotten tariff act, not the name of the third assistant clerk who filed the paperwork in Philadelphia, the big one, the Declaration of Independence, the National Birth Certificate, the document that announced the principles that made the rest of American experiment possible, and nearly half of Americans missed it. Now some people will say, come on, Shawn, that's just trivia. No, it's not trivia. Trivia is forgetting who won the 1978 Super Bowl. Trivia isn't remembering the capital of South Dakota. Trivia is not knowing how many times some second-tier vice president ran for office before disappearing into the attic of history. Not knowing what America's 250th anniversary celebrates isn't trivia. That's civic amnesia. That's a country losing the ability to explain itself. And when a country can no longer explain itself, it becomes easy to manipulate, easy to divide, easy to shame, easy to buy, easy to scare, easy to herd. Because if you don't know what the country is, you can be talked into believing it's anything. You can be told it's evil from birth. You can be told it's perfect and needs no correction. You can be told rights come from government. You can be told the Constitution is outdated. You could be told the Supreme Court is illegitimate whenever your side loses. You could be told free speech only protects approved speech. You could be told citizenship is just paperwork. You could be told patriotism means blind loyalty to a politician. You could be told patriotism means hating your country loudly enough to impress other miserable people online. And if you don't know better, you'll swallow it, not because you're evil, because you're uninformed. And uninformed people are easy prey. This episode has 5 parts. First, we're going to talk about civic amnesia and why not knowing your own national story isn't harmless. Second, we're going to talk about the founders. Not the fake marble statue version, not the cartoon villain version, the actual political thinkers who knew human beings were ambitious, selfish, factional, corruptible, and dangerous when given power. Third, we're going to talk about rights and responsibility, because Americans love screaming about rights, but a lot of people get real quiet when the subject turns to duty, discipline, self-restraint, law, and consequences. Fourth, we're going to talk about education. And I don't mean the fantasy version where every teacher is a saint and every institution is noble. I mean the part where schools, universities, media, and ideology help produce a population that can recite slogans but can't explain the system they want to control. And fifth, we're going to land the hammer. You can't preserve what you can't explain. You can't defend liberty if you don't know what liberty is. You can't defend the Constitution if you think it's just a magic spell written by dead white guys to annoy your favorite political tribe. You can't inherit a republic if you're too lazy to learn why it exists. Let's get into it. Before we start segment 1, let me plug one of my books because I don't write these things for decoration. If this episode hits the nerve it should hit, go read Reclaiming Our Ideals, The Importance of Foundational Principles in Today's Society. That book deals directly with founding principles, natural law, consent, property, virtue, and the moral drift of modern America. In other words, the exact mess we're talking about today. If you're tired of people treating American principles like outdated furniture they inherited but never cared for, Reclaiming Our Ideals lays out why these principles still matter and why abandoning them is not progress. It's decay with better marketing. Reclaiming Our Ideals by Shawn Armstrong, available through the usual book platforms. Now, back to the show. Civic amnesia isn't harmless. Let's start there. Because every time somebody points out that Americans don't know basic history, basic government, basic rights, or basic constitutional structure, someone inevitably responds with, well, people are busy. They have lives. That's true. People are busy. They have jobs. They have families. They have bills. They have problems. They have medical appointments. They have kids acting like feral raccoons in public. They have bosses who think every email is an emergency. They have groceries that cost more than they should. They have lives. I get it. But here's the problem. Being busy doesn't exempt you from being a citizen. You don't get to live inside a republic, vote in its elections, demand its protections, scream about its failures, benefit from its freedoms, and then act like knowing what the 4th of July celebrates is unreasonable homework. That's not how this works. Citizenship isn't passive. Citizenship isn't just showing up every few years, poking a ballot like you're ordering fries from a touchscreen, and then going back to complaining about the country online. A republic requires a certain level of public competence. Not perfection, competence. You should know what the Declaration of Independence is. You should know what the Constitution does. You should know what the Bill of Rights protects. You should know the 3 branches of government. You should know that the president is not a king. You should know that the courts don't exist just to validate your tribe. You should know that Congress writes laws. You should know that rights aren't gifts from politicians. You should know that free speech applies especially when the speech irritates you. You should know that due process applies even when you hate the accused. You should know that political opponents aren't automatically enemies of the state. You should know that disagreement isn't violence. You should know that losing an election isn't proof of the system failed. You should know that winning an election isn't permission to burn every guardrail to the ground. These are basic things, not advanced placement civics, basic things. And then citizens don't know them. Politics becomes stupid. And once politics becomes stupid, it becomes dangerous. The 4th of July is supposed to be more than fireworks, hot dogs, parades, cheap flag shirts, and people blowing off fingers because alcohol and explosives remain undefeated as a human stupidity test. The 4th of July marks the Declaration of Independence, and the Declaration wasn't just a breakup letter to King George. It was a statement of political philosophy. It said human beings have rights that government doesn't create. It said governments exist to secure those rights. It said government gets its just powers from the consent of the governed. It said when government becomes destructive of those ends, people have a right to alter or abolish it and institute new government. That's not small. That's not cute. That's not just old language under glass. That's the philosophical foundation of the American experiment. And if you don't understand that, then you can't understand America. You can live here. You can vote here. You can complain here. You can wave a flag here. You can burn a flag here. You can cash a government check here. You can post whatever idiotic political take your thumbs can manufacture here. But you don't understand what you're standing on. And when enough people don't understand what they're standing on, the floor eventually gives way. This is where the modern American habit of treating ignorance as harmless becomes poisonous. People say, well, not everyone needs to know history. Wrong. Not everyone needs to be a historian. But everyone voting in a republic should know enough history to avoid being played like a cheap instrument. Because history isn't just names and dates. History is pattern recognition. History teaches you how republics fail, how governments centralize power, how parties become cults, how mobs justify violence, how elites manipulate language, how rights get redefined into privileges, how emergency powers become permanent habits, how schools stop teaching citizens and start manufacturing activists, how institutions protect themselves instead of the people they were created to serve, how propaganda stops sounding like propaganda when everyone around you repeats it. That's why history matters. Not because you need to win a trivia contest, because you need to recognize the scam before it owns you. A person who doesn't understand the Declaration can be taught that America was founded only on oppression. A person who doesn't understand the Constitution can be taught that checks and balances are just obstruction. A person who doesn't understand federalism can be taught that every problem requires a federal solution. A person who doesn't understand free speech can be taught that censorship is safety. A person who doesn't understand due process can be taught that accusation equals guilt. A person who doesn't understand property rights can be taught that government control is compassion. A person who doesn't understand religious liberty can be taught that faith should be tolerated only when it stays obedient. A person who doesn't understand citizenship can be taught that borders are cruelty. A person who doesn't understand equal protection can be taught that discrimination becomes justice if the right committee approves it. That's the danger. Civic ignorance doesn't sit quietly in the corner. It gets recruited. It gets organized. It gets radicalized. It gets flattered. It gets told, you're not ignorant, you're morally enlightened. And once ignorance gets moral vanity attached to it, you have a problem. Because now the uninformed person isn't simply wrong, they're proud. And proud ignorance is one of the most destructive forces in political life. This is why the 250th anniversary confusion matters. Because anniversaries aren't just calendar events. They're moments of national memory. They force a people to ask, what are we remembering? What are we honoring? What are we carrying forward? And if the answer is, I don't know, but I hope there are fireworks, then we have a problem. The bicentennial in 1976 happened in a country that had its own issues. Vietnam, Watergate, inflation, distrust, cultural conflict, crime, political chaos. Nobody should pretend 1976 was some perfect national choir performance. It wasn't. But the country still had a more common civic vocabulary. People could disagree bitterly and still understand that July 4th was tied to independence, founding, revolution, and the Declaration. Now we have a country where people will scream about fascism but can't explain separations of power. They'll scream about democracy but can't explain a republic. They'll scream about rights but can't name the rights. They'll scream about tyranny but think tyranny means losing an argument on social media. They'll scream about oppression while demanding the government silence everyone who offends them. This isn't adult citizenship. This is political adolescence with broadband. Now, some people will hear this and say, you just want blind patriotism. No, blind patriotism is useless. Blind patriotism is cheap. Blind patriotism is the guy who knows 3 slogans, owns 17 flag hats, and thinks every criticism of government is treason unless his side is doing the criticizing. That's not patriotism. That's team sports for people who failed civics. Real patriotism isn't blind. Real patriotism knows the country's principles and holds the country accountable to them. Real patriotism can say slavery was evil and the Declaration was still revolutionary. Real patriotism can say America failed its own principles many times, and those principles still gave reformers the moral language to fight back. Real patriotism can say the Constitution has been amended because the system had mechanisms for correction. Real patriotism can say the country is flawed without pretending it's uniquely evil. Real patriotism can say the country is worth defending without pretending every leader deserves obedience. That's mature patriotism. That requires knowledge. That requires judgment. That requires something more than red, white, and blue decorations slapped over historical ignorance. And on the other side, you have the anti-American cosplay crowd. The people who treat every national holiday like a hostage negotiation with their own misery. They don't critique America from knowledge. They resent America from fashion. They know oppression vocabulary. They know grievance categories. They know how to accuse. They know how to sneer. But ask them to explain the Declaration, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, natural rights, consent to the governed, limited government, federalism, the Bill of Rights, or why the American system was designed the way it was, and suddenly the room gets real quiet. Or worse, they start reciting slogans they learned from people who hate the country for a living. That's not courage, that's borrowed contempt. And borrowed contempt is cheap. So when we talk about civic amnesia, we're not talking about people forgetting some harmless fact. We're talking about a nation losing the shared memory required for self-government. A republic isn't self-sustaining. It doesn't run on autopilot. The Constitution doesn't enforce itself. The Declaration doesn't explain itself. Rights don't defend themselves. Institutions don't magically stay honest. Political power doesn't restrain itself out of kindness. And liberty doesn't survive because people once wrote beautiful words on parchment. Liberty survives because living citizens understand those words, defend those words, and pass those words on. If they don't, the republic becomes a shell. The rituals remain, the slogans remain, the flags remain, the elections remain, the politicians remain, the talking heads remain, but the meaning rots out from the inside. And then everyone stands around acting shocked when the structure starts collapsing. That's civic amnesia. And no, it's not harmless. The founders weren't naive. Let's kill that fairy tale right now. The men who designed the American constitutional system didn't sit around thinking human beings were naturally pure, wise, restrained, generous, and immune to corruption. They weren't writing a children's book. They had studied history. They knew republics could fall. They knew mobs could become dangerous. They knew rulers could become tyrants. They knew legislatures could abuse power. They knew executives could grab power. They knew courts could become political. They knew factions could tear a nation apart. They knew ambition was baked into human nature. They knew people with power usually want more of it. That's why the system was built with restraints. Checks and balances weren't created because the founders trusted politicians. Checks and balances were created because they didn't. That's the part modern people miss. The American system isn't built on the fantasy that leaders are good. It's built on the recognition that leaders are human and human beings with power need limits. That's why James Madison wrote about ambition counteracting ambition. That line matters. It's not just a phrase people quote when they want to sound like they read something once. It's a core design principle. The idea was simple. If you give one branch too much power, it'll abuse it. If you give one faction too much power, it will impose itself. If you allow one person or one institution to define the limits of its own authority, the limits disappear. So you divide power. You separate power. You make branches compete. You give each branch tools to resist the others. You make lawmaking slow. You make power frustrating. You make government inefficiency on purpose, or government inefficient on purpose. And modern Americans hate that. They hate it because they've been trained to think speed equals virtue. They want the president to just do something. They want the courts to just fix it. They want Congress to stop obstructing. They want agencies to act now. They want their side to move fast and the other side to shut up. But constitutional government isn't designed to satisfy impatience. It's designed to restrain power. And restraint always irritates people who want power used for their preferred outcome. This is where both sides need to be honest, because this isn't only a left-wing problem. The left does it constantly, but the right isn't innocent. When the president is your guy, executive power suddenly looks efficient. When the court gives your side a win, judicial review is sacred. When Congress blocks your opponent, gridlock is constitutional courage. When Congress blocks your side, gridlock is sabotage. When states resist your opponent, federalism is noble. When states resist your side, federalism becomes obstruction. This is how partisans think. And the founders knew it. That's why the system wasn't designed around trusting the virtue of whichever mob won the last election. It was designed around suspicion, healthy suspicion, institutional suspicion, the kind that says, no, you don't get all the power because you won an argument. No, you don't get to erase limits because your cause feels urgent. No, you don't get to suspend the rules because your side is morally special. No, you don't get to call yourself democracy while demanding unchecked authority. That's the constitutional mindset. And it requires citizens who understand why limits matter even when limits are inconvenient, especially when limits are inconvenient. But the founders expected corruption. They expected faction. They expected ambition. They expected selfishness. They expected political conflict. What they didn't build was a magic machine that would survive unlimited stupidity. The system assumes citizens possess enough knowledge to recognize when the system is being abused. It assumes citizens understand the difference between lawful authority and raw power. It assumes citizens know when a politician is lying about the Constitution. It assumes citizens understand why rights apply to opponents. It assumes citizens can tell the difference between criticism and treason. It assumes citizens can hear a demagogue and recognize the smell. That assumption is under stress. Because if citizens don't know how the system works, checks and balances become words. Separation of powers becomes trivia. Federalism becomes confusion. The Bill of Rights becomes whatever the tribe needs it to mean this week. And politicians love that. Don't ever forget that politicians benefit from civic ignorance. A citizen who knows the system can ask hard questions. A citizen who doesn't know the system can be manipulated with slogans. That's why every power-hungry faction in history prefers an ignorant population with strong emotions. It's easier to govern people by fear, resentment, envy, loyalty, and panic than by reason. And America has a lot of people running on fear, resentment, envy, loyalty, and panic. The machine is well fed. Take the way people talk about democracy now. They use the word like a club. Our democracy. Defend democracy. Threat to democracy. Democracy is on the ballot. Half the time what they mean is, my side should win. That's not a principle. That's a tantrum in a suit. The United States is a constitutional republic. It uses democratic mechanisms. Elections matter. Majority rule matters in the proper spheres. But majority will is not absolute. Rights restrict majorities. The Constitution restricts majorities. Courts can restrict majorities. Federalism restricts majorities. The Senate restricts raw population majorities. The amendment process restricts emotional political stampedes. That's the design. It's not a bug. It's not a glitch. It's not fascism when the system refuses to hand your political faction a chainsaw and a permission slip. It's constitutional government. And if people don't understand that, they're easy to radicalize against the very restraints that protect them. You hear it constantly with the Supreme Court. When the court rules one way, one side says it's defending the Constitution. When the court rules the other way, suddenly it's illegitimate, corrupt, stolen, extremist, dangerous, and must be packed, ignored, or politically broken. Now courts can be criticized. Judges can be wrong. Bad decisions exist. Judicial philosophy matters. But the modern habit of treating legitimacy as nothing more than agreement is poisonous. If the institution is legitimate only when it gives you what you want, then you don't believe in institutions, you believe in outcomes. And once outcomes become the only standard, every limit becomes disposable. That's how republics rot. Not usually in one dramatic moment. Not with a villain in a cape announcing, "Today, tyranny begins." It happens slowly. People excuse one violation because their side benefits, then another, then they forget why the limit existed. Then they teach the next generation the limit was oppression. Then they act shocked when the power they cheered gets used against them. That's the rhythm. Human beings keep acting like this is a new song. It's not. History has been playing it for centuries. The founders understood faction. Federalist 10 is about faction. Madison didn't pretend factions could be eliminated unless liberty itself was destroyed. That was the point. If people are free, they'll disagree. If they organize, they'll form interests. They'll pursue advantage. They'll compete. The cure for faction couldn't be the destruction of liberty, so the answer was structure. A large republic, representation, competing interests, a system built to prevent any one faction from easily dominating the whole. That's grown-up political thinking, not utopian nonsense. Not the modern fantasy that if we just put the right people in charge, conflict disappears. Conflict doesn't disappear. Power doesn't become pure. Human nature doesn't get abolished because some activist wrote a mission statement. The founders knew better. They knew that politics required channeling conflict, not pretending it could be erased. And that's why the system is hard. It was supposed to be hard. Hard to centralize power, hard to pass sweeping changes, hard to silence opposition, hard to destroy rights, hard to make one political mood permanent, hard to let temporary majorities become permanent masters. But here's the catch. Hard systems require serious citizens. A serious citizen understands that not getting your way doesn't mean tyranny. A serious citizen understands that government being slow doesn't mean government is broken. A serious citizen understands that rights protect disgusting people too. A serious citizen understands that your favorite leader still needs limits. A serious citizen understands that emergencies are when limits matter most. A serious citizen understands that the Constitution isn't there to maximize your emotional satisfaction. A serious citizen understands that the other side winning an election isn't proof the republic has died. It may be proof you lost. There's a difference. Modern political commentary often refuse to admit that difference because panic sells, outrage sells, apocalypse sells. Moderation doesn't trend. Saying, our system is working as designed and you simply lost this round doesn't get clicks. So instead, every election becomes the final battle for civilization. Every court case becomes the end of democracy. Every appointment becomes a coup. Every disagreement becomes violence. Every speech becomes danger. Every institution becomes legitimate only when it submits. This isn't civic seriousness. This is mass emotional incontinence dressed up as political analysis. The founders expected corruption. They expected ambition. They expected conflict. They built mechanisms to restrain power. But those mechanisms require citizens who understand them. And this is where the stupidity problem becomes fatal. Because when citizens are ignorant, they attack the restraints. They think the restraints are the problem. They don't see the predator. They attack the fence. They don't see the abuse. They attack the rule that slows the abuse down. They don't see the danger of concentrated power. They complain that divided power doesn't move fast enough. They don't see the constitutional friction as a form of protection. They call it obstruction. And then they hand power to whichever faction promises to bulldoze the inconvenience. That's how free people vote themselves into weaker forms of freedom. Not because they wake up saying, I'd like less liberty today, but because they don't understand the machinery that protects liberty. They mistake guardrails for obstacles. They mistake limits for weakness. They mistake restraint for cowardice. They mistake constitutionalism for inaction. And they mistake their own impatience for wisdom.
That's why this episode matters. The Republic was built for flawed people. It was built for ambitious people. It was built for competing interests. It was built for disagreement. It was built for conflict under law. But it wasn't built for a population that refuses to learn what it inherited. You can't operate a system you don't understand. You can't repair a system you can't describe. You can't defend a system whose principles you've never bothered to study. And you can't expect the Constitution to save you if you treat it like an old document that only matters when your side needs a quote. The founders expected corruption. They expected faction. They expected ambition. They expected danger. What they didn't expect was a nation of citizens proud to know nothing. If this segment hit home, go read Consent of the Governed, the fundamental principle in the Federalist Papers and its relevance today. That book is built around the core idea that legitimate government comes from the people, not from mob impulse. Consent has structure. Liberty has limits. Constitutional government has logic. The Federalist Papers weren't written so modern Americans could ignore them while screaming about democracy through a phone they use mainly for outrage and food delivery. Consent of the Governed by Shawn Armstrong. If you want to understand why the American system was designed to restrain power, start there. Americans love rights. They love talking about rights. They love demanding rights. They love posting about rights. They love invoking rights in arguments where half the people involved can't define the right they're invoking. Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, right to bear arms, due process, equal protection, privacy, property, voting, assembly, petition, you name it. People love rights. But responsibility? That's where the room starts clearing out. Because responsibility is less fun. Responsibility doesn't flatter you. Responsibility doesn't give you instant moral status. Responsibility asks something from you. It says your freedom requires self-control. Your rights require respect for the rights of others. Your citizenship requires knowledge. Your vote requires seriousness. Your speech requires courage. Your liberty requires discipline. Your inheritance requires stewardship. That word matters, stewardship. It means you receive something you didn't create, and you have a duty not to destroy it before handing it off. Modern America is full of people who want inheritance without stewardship. They want the benefits of a free society with none of the habits that keep a society free. That doesn't work. The modern rights conversation is often childish because it treats rights like personal permission slips. People say, I have free speech. And what they mean is, I should be able to say anything without criticism. Consequences are someone calling me an idiot. No. Free speech protects you from government punishment for protected expression. It doesn't guarantee applause. It doesn't guarantee employment. It doesn't protect you from being corrected. It doesn't shield you from social disagreement. It doesn't make your opinion intelligent. The right to speak doesn't create the obligation for everyone else to pretend you made sense. That would be cruel to language. Then you have people who say speech is violence. No, speech is speech. Violence is violence. This distinction used to be easy before universities and online activists decided that redefining words was easier than developing emotional resilience. If speech becomes violence, then actual violence becomes self-defense. That's the danger. When you blur that line, you give unstable people permission to attack speakers, shut down events, censor opponents, and call coercion safety. That's not rights language, that's authoritarian language wearing therapy clothes. Rights require responsibility because rights exist in a shared political order. You have free speech. So does the person you hate. You have religious liberties. So does the faith you dislike. You have due process. So does the accused person you're sure is guilty. You have the right to protest. So do people whose protests annoy you. You have the right to vote. So do people whose votes make you question public education. That's the deal. Rights aren't special protections for people who you approve of. Rights are rules for the whole system. And if you only defend rights when your side benefits, you don't defend rights. You defend advantage. That's not principle. That's tribal convenience. This is why modern politics is so poisonous. People don't ask, what rule should govern everyone? They ask, what can my side use right now? That's how you get people who defended protests suddenly demanding crackdowns. People who defended executive power suddenly discovering limits. People who defended court rulings suddenly attacking the courts. People who defended free speech suddenly demanding censorship. People who defended states' rights suddenly demanding federal force. People who defended institutional norms suddenly wanting to burn the institution down. And they always have an excuse. They always say, this time it's different. Every faction in history says that. Every power grab comes with a moral emergency label attached. Nobody ever says, we're violating principles because we're selfish hypocrites. They say, the danger is too great. They say, the stakes are too high. They say, our opponents are too dangerous. They say, normal rules can't apply. That's how people talk themselves into becoming exactly what they claim to oppose. Responsibility is what stops that. Responsibility says, I'll defend this right even when it helps someone I dislike. Responsibility says, I'll accept this limit even when it slows my side. Responsibility says, I'll tell the truth even when the truth hurts my argument. Responsibility says, I'll not call everything fascism because I lost. Responsibility says, I won't call every critic a communist because I'm too lazy to respond. Responsibility says, I'll learn before I vote. Responsibility says, I won't demand government power I would fear in the hands of my enemy. That last one's important. Never support a power you wouldn't trust your worst political opponent to use. That one rule would fix a lot of stupidity. Not all of it. This is still humanity we're dealing with, but a lot. The problem is modern culture rewards demand and punishes restraint. If you're angry, you're authentic. If you're offended, you're brave. If you're loud, you're powerful. If you're impulsive, you're real. If you call everyone you disagree with dangerous, you're defending justice. And if someone tells you to calm down, learn the facts, understand the law, and think through the consequences, they're accused of tone policing or cowardice. This is how adult discipline gets replaced by emotional entitlement. And emotional entitlement is poison in a republic, because a republic requires citizens who can lose and remain lawful. Citizens who can disagree and remain civil enough to preserve the system. Citizens who can be offended and not demand censorship. Citizens who can be afraid and not demand tyranny. Citizens who can be angry and not justify violence. Citizens who can want change and still respect process. That's hard, but freedom is hard. Anybody who tells you freedom is easy is selling something, usually a campaign slogan. Rights without responsibility become childish demands, and childish demands are everywhere. People demand safety but reject order. People demand justice but reject due process. People demand equality but reject equal standards. They demand freedom but reject consequences. They demand democracy but reject election losses. They demand truth but reward propaganda. They demand tolerance but practice ideological blacklisting. They demand compassion but outsource every hard decision to government force. They demand community but destroy the shared norms that make community possible. They demand respect but treat disagreement as harm. This isn't citizenship. This is adolescence wearing political vocabulary. And here's the ugly truth. A lot of Americans don't want freedom. They want comfort. They want validation. They want security. They want their side in charge. They want their moral preferences enforced. They want their fears treated as law. They want rights without friction. They want speech without offense. They want elections without loss. They want courts without disappointment. They want history without guilt. They want patriotism without duty. They want citizenship without obligation. That's not freedom. That's supervised living with patriotic branding. Freedom requires risk. Freedom means bad people still say bad things. Freedom means stupid people will vote. Freedom means politicians you dislike will win. Freedom means courts will issue rulings you hate. Freedom means your religion, your speech, your property, your self-defense rights, your political association, and your privacy all exist in a system where other people get protections too. And yes, that's messy. Welcome to self-government. It's not supposed to feel like a padded room. This is why duties matter. The founding generation talked about virtue for a reason. That word makes modern people uncomfortable because they think virtue means fake moral superiority or religious scolding. But civic virtue means the habits required for self-government. Self-control, honesty, courage, public-mindedness, respect for law, respect for rights, willingness to sacrifice private appetite for public stability, willingness to defend principle over party. Without civic virtue, liberty decays into license, and license isn't freedom. License is just people doing whatever they want until the chaos gets so bad that everyone begs for control. That's the cycle. First, people reject responsibility. Then disorder grows. Then fear grows. Then people demand stronger authority. Then freedom shrinks. And the same people who refuse to govern themselves complain when someone else starts governing them harder. This applies to every part of public life. Speech. If you want free speech, you must tolerate speech you hate. Religion. If you want religious liberty, you must tolerate religious beliefs you reject. Guns. If you want the right to bear arms, you must accept responsibility for safety, training, judgment, and restraint. Voting. If you want to vote respected, you must treat voting like civic duty, not emotional revenge. Protest. If you want the right to protest, you must respect the difference between lawful protest and criminal intimidation. Law. If you want law to protect you, you must accept law when it protects people you dislike. Citizenship isn't selective. Principle isn't seasonal. Responsibility isn't optional. This is where modern public discourse becomes pathetic. People want maximum rights for themselves and minimum rights for enemies. Maximum grace for their side and maximum punishment for the other side. Maximum suspicion of opposing institutions and maximum trust in friendly ones. Maximum benefit of the doubt for their leaders and maximum suspicion for yours. This is how children think. A serious citizen applies standards consistently. A serious citizen knows that if a principle changes depending on who benefits, it was never a principle, it was a tactic. And this country is drowning in tactics. Political parties use rights tactically. Media uses outrage tactically. Activists use moral language tactically. Institutions use procedure tactically. Citizens use constitutional phrases tactically. Everyone wants the language of principle without the burden of principle. That's how rights become slogans, and slogans can't hold a republic together. Here's the hard line. If you can't defend the rights of people you dislike, stop pretending you believe in rights. If you can't accept limits on politicians you support, stop pretending you believe in limited government. If you can't accept election results when your side loses, stop pretending you believe in Republican government. If you can't tolerate offensive speech, stop pretending you believe in free speech. If you can't admit your side lies, stop pretending truth matters to you. If you can't handle responsibility, stop demanding the benefits of liberty, because liberty isn't a toy. It's not a mood. It's not a slogan. It's not a flag graphic on your profile. Liberty is a discipline, and if citizens lose the discipline, they eventually lose the liberty.
Now we need to talk about education, and this is where people get nervous, because education has become one of those topics where everyone is supposed to speak gently, like we're standing in a hospital room. No, we're standing in the wreckage of a civic failure. So let's speak plainly. The education system failed a lot of Americans. Then it called the victims enlightened. That's one of the dirtiest tricks in modern public life. You take people who were never properly taught history, civics, logic, economics, constitutional structure, or basic political philosophy, then you feed them ideology. Then you flatter them. Then you tell them they're not ignorant. They're awake. They're not historically illiterate. They're deconstructing narratives. They're not repeating slogans. They're speaking truth to power. They're not confused about America. They're morally superior to it. That's not education. That's grooming political vanity. A serious education should teach students how to think, not what to chant.
It should teach the Declaration of Independence and the contradictions of slavery. It should teach the Constitution and the fights over ratification. It should teach the Federalist and Anti-Federalist arguments. It should teach the Bill of Rights. It should teach federalism. It should teach Reconstruction. It should teach civil rights. It should teach the failures and the corrections. It should teach capitalism, socialism, communism, fascism, progressivism, liberalism, conservatism, republicanism, and the actual definitions of these words. Not cartoon versions, not partisan bumper stickers, actual definitions. It should teach students to read primary sources. It should teach them to ask, compared to what? It should teach them that every political system has trade-offs. It should teach them that good intentions don't erase consequences. It should teach them that state power is dangerous even when used by people with nice slogans. It should teach them that liberty is rare. It should teach them that equality under law is different from forced equality of outcome. It should teach them that rights aren't feelings. It should teach them that human nature didn't start in 2012 on social media. That would be education. Instead, too many institutions produce people who can identify oppression in every sentence but can't identify the three branches of government without checking their phone. Now, to be fair, not all schools are the same. Not all teachers are the same. There are good teachers. There are serious teachers. There are teachers trying to do the job inside systems that make it harder every year. There are teachers surrounded by bad policy, bad administration, bad parents, ideological pressure, testing obsession, discipline problems, and students glued to phones like the screen contains oxygen. So this isn't a lazy attack on every teacher. That would be stupid, and we're trying to reduce stupid today, not franchise it. But the system as a whole has a civic output problem. If students graduate without understanding basic government, basic history, basic rights, and basic responsibility, then the system failed. I don't care how many slogans they know. I don't care how many awareness days they celebrated. I don't care how many posters were on the wall. If they can't explain the republic, the system failed. The numbers aren't comforting. Civics results for 8th graders have been weak. History knowledge has been weak. Adult civic knowledge is uneven. Some surveys show improvement in basic areas like naming the three branches, which is good. Take the win where you can find it, but the broader picture remains ugly. Too many Americans don't know what the Constitution is for. Too many don't know why independence was declared. Too many don't understand rights. Too many can't distinguish political systems. Too many think socialism is just free stuff with better vibes. Too many think fascism means people I dislike. Too many think democracy means my side wins. Too many think capitalism means corporations doing anything they want. Too many think communism has never really been tried because apparently history books are now decorative objects. This is a civic disaster. The issue isn't just lack of knowledge, it's replacement knowledge. That's worse. A person who knows they don't know can learn. A person who doesn't know but thinks they're enlightened is harder to reach. And modern education often replaces civic knowledge with political attitude. Instead of learning American history as a complicated inheritance, students are taught moral postures, shame posture, rage posture, resentment posture, victim posture, savior posture, activist posture. Everything becomes a power analysis. Everything becomes identity. Everything becomes oppressor and oppressed. Everything becomes structures and systems and lived experience and narrative. And yes, power matters. Identity can matter. Injustice exists. Institutions can abuse people. History includes ugly realities. Only a fool denies that. But if your entire education reduces civilization to victim groups and oppressor groups, you're not educated, you're programmed. You've been given a moral sorting machine, not a mind. The American founding is a perfect example. A real education teaches the contradiction. The Declaration declared universal principles while slavery existed. That's a real contradiction. A serious mind can hold both facts. The principles were revolutionary. The application was incomplete and often hypocritical. The tension shaped American history. Abolitionists used the Declaration's language. Lincoln used it. Civil rights leaders used it. Frederick Douglass wrestled with it. Martin Luther King Jr. appealed to it. The country's highest ideals became weapons against the country's worst practices. That's complex. That's history. But modern ideological teaching often flattens it. One side says the founding was pure and nearly flawless. Wrong. The other side says the founding was nothing but oppression. Also wrong. Both are childish. The truth is better and harder. America was founded on principles it didn't fully live up to. Those principles still matter because they gave the future generations the standard by which to condemn the failures. That's the American story. Not perfection, correction. Not innocence, a standard. Not a sinless beginning, a claim about human rights that exposed the nation's own contradictions and gave reformers language to fight. If students don't learn that, they'll either become blind patriots or fashionable cynics. Both are useless. Credentialed ignorance is another problem. This country is full of people with degrees who aren't educated in any meaningful civic sense. They can speak in theory. They can use academic vocabulary. They can attach systemic to almost anything and sound like they found a secret passage in reality. But they can't reason from principle. They can't define terms. They can't make distinctions. They can't separate fact from interpretation. They can't argue without psychologizing opponents. They can't read a primary source without dragging it through modern ideology first. They can't say, this historical figure was wrong here, right there, limited in this way, important in that way. No, everything becomes a purity test. That's not education, that's moral vandalism. And the worst part is they think the credential proves intelligence. It doesn't. A credential proves you completed a program. Maybe that program was rigorous. Maybe it was useful. Maybe it was an expensive daycare center for ideological conformity. Depends on the program. The paper alone doesn't prove wisdom. It doesn't prove judgment. It doesn't prove civic knowledge. It doesn't prove historical understanding. It doesn't prove character. America has plenty of credentialed people who are civic idiots. And yes, that sentence will offend exactly the people who need it most. Media made this worse, because media used to at least pretend to inform. Now much of it exists to sort audiences into emotional camps. News is often not delivered as information. It's delivered as identity reinforcement. Here's what happened. Here's why your side was right. Here's why the other side is dangerous. Here's the approved moral interpretation. Here's the villain. Here's the victim. Here's the panic button. Here's the advertisement. Repeat tomorrow. That's not journalism. That's political nutrition for people who want to stay angry. And when citizens consume that every day, they become less capable of thinking constitutionally. They think narratively. Who's the hero? Who's the villain? Who's the oppressed? Who must be punished? Who must be silenced? Who must be obeyed? This is how media turns civic life into emotional theater. And people wonder why public debate is stupid. It's stupid because the incentive structure rewards stupid. Nuance doesn't trend. Historical context doesn't go viral. Careful definitions don't produce rage engagement. But a bad faith quote clipped into 8 seconds, that travels. A fake moral panic, that travels. A simplistic accusation, that travels. A historically false comparison to Hitler, fascism, communism, slavery, or tyranny, that travels first class. The algorithm didn't create human stupidity, but it did give it a distribution network. So yes, education failed. But it didn't fail alone. Parents failed too. Let's not let families escape the conversation like they slipped out the back door. Schools matter, but parents are supposed to raise citizens too. If your kid knows every influencer, every game skin, every song lyric, every celebrity scandal, and every slang phrase, but can't explain the Bill of Rights, That's not only a school problem, that's a home problem. If your kid thinks America is evil but can't explain the Declaration, that's a home problem. If your kid thinks rights are feelings, that's a home problem. If your kid can't handle disagreement without melting down, that's a home problem. If your kid has never been taught duty, gratitude, discipline, sacrifice, self-control, or respect for law, that's a home problem. Schools can damage civic knowledge. Media can damage civic knowledge. But parents who outsource moral and civic formation to screens have no right to act shocked when the screen raises an idiot. Let's talk about universities. Universities should be places where young adults encounter serious arguments, hard books, competing traditions, intellectual conflict, discomfort, rigorous debate, historical depth. But too many universities became expensive temples of fragility. Speech codes, bias response teams, ideological departments, administrative cowardice, students trained to treat discomfort as danger, professors punished for refusing the approved language, activists acting like intellectual arsonists, and administrators sending emails that read like a committee tried to apologize to a cloud. This is not how you produce citizens. This is how you produce brittle, expensive, resentful people who think disagreement is abuse. A republic can't run on that. A republic needs adults, not credentialed toddlers with institutional vocabulary. This is the heart of the education failure. We taught people to critique before we taught them to understand. That's backwards. You should understand something before you attack it. You should understand the Declaration before dismissing it. You should understand the Constitution before calling it obsolete. You should understand capitalism before denouncing it. You should understand socialism before praising it. You should understand fascism before throwing the word around like confetti. You should understand communism before acting like you just need better management. You should understand the courts before attacking judicial review. You should understand federalism before demanding national solutions to every local issue. You should understand rights before demanding restrictions on other people. But modern education often starts with critique. Critique America. Critique capitalism. Critique tradition. Critique religion. Critique family. Critique law. Critique history. Critique everything. Fine. Critique has its place. But critique without understanding is vandalism. And a lot of what gets called critical thinking is just trained suspicion aimed at one political direction. That's not critical thinking. That's selective cynicism. A healthy education should create citizens who can say, America has done great things. America has done some terrible things. The founding principles matter. The country violated them. The Constitution restrained power. The Constitution also required amendments to correct serious failures. Capitalism creates prosperity. Capitalism requires moral and legal limits. Government can protect rights. Government can destroy rights. Tradition can preserve wisdom. Tradition can preserve injustice. Change can correct wrongs. Change can also destroy what people don't understand. That's mature thinking. But mature thinking is hard to sell in a culture addicted to moral simplicity. So instead, people pick a side and memorize a script. America good. America bad. Government good. Government bad. Police good. Police bad. Courts good. Courts bad. Capitalism good. Capitalism bad. Religion good. Religion bad. That's kindergarten politics, and too many adults live there permanently. Education failed when it stopped producing people capable of inherited responsibility, because that's what citizenship is. Inherited responsibility. You inherit a country. You inherit its debt. You inherit its achievements. You inherit its sins. You inherit its institutions. You inherit its arguments. You inherit its symbols. You inherit its unfinished work. You don't get to choose a clean inheritance. Nobody does. Your job isn't to worship it blindly. Your job is not to burn it down theatrically. Your job is to understand it, improve it, preserve what's worth preserving, correct what's wrong, and pass it on stronger than when you received it. That requires education, real education. Not slogans, not indoctrination, not sentimental patriotism, not fashionable hatred, education. And until we recover that, civic amnesia will keep spreading. This is a good place to mention Dismantling the Republic, the role of progressive elites in America's descent into tribalism. This book gets into citizenship decline, middle-class erosion, immigration politics, tribalism, bureaucratic power, constitutional change, and the way elite institutions help to fracture national identity. If you listen to this show and think, Shawn, this country feels like it's being pulled apart by people who benefit from the pulling, then Dismantling the Republic is for you. It's not a soft book. It's not written to pat anyone on the head. It's a direct look at how a republic gets weakened from the inside. Dismantling the Republic by Shawn Armstrong. Go find it and read it. Here's the final hammer. You can't preserve what you can't explain. That's the core of this whole episode. If Americans can't explain liberty, they can't defend liberty. If Americans can't explain citizenship, they can't practice citizenship. If Americans can't explain the Constitution, they can't preserve constitutional government. If Americans can't explain the Declaration, they can't understand the moral claim at the root of the country. If Americans can't explain rights, they'll turn rights into weapons. If Americans can't explain responsibility, they'll turn freedom into entitlement. If Americans can't explain the Republic, they'll squat inside it until it collapses around them. That's harsh. Good. It should be. Because this isn't a minor issue. This isn't a personality complaint. This isn't me being irritated because people on the internet are stupid, although that's a renewable resource large enough to power several cities. This is deeper. A republic depends on citizens who understand the thing that they're preserving. And too many Americans don't. Ask people what liberty means. A lot of them will say, freedom. Fine. What does freedom mean? Then things get messy. Some people think freedom means doing whatever they want. Some think freedom means government providing whatever they need. Some think freedom means being protected from offense. Some think freedom means escaping consequences. Some think freedom means their side having power. Some think freedom means no rules. Some think freedom means total equality. Some think freedom means personal autonomy with no duty to anyone. Those aren't the same thing. And some of them aren't freedom at all. Liberty in the American tradition is ordered liberty. That phrase matters. Ordered liberty means freedom under law, freedom protected by law, freedom limited by the rights of others, freedom tied to responsibility, freedom that requires self-government. Not just government out there in Washington, self-government inside the citizen. A people who can't govern themselves personally will eventually demand more external government politically. That's the brutal equation. If citizens lack discipline, the state grows. If families fail, bureaucracy grows. If communities collapse, federal programs grow. If people can't control appetites, regulation grows. If people can't tolerate speech, censorship grows. If people can't handle risk, surveillance grows. If people can't live responsibly, control grows. Freedom requires a certain kind of person, not perfect, but serious. And unserious people eventually become dependent people. Dependent people are easier to rule than free citizens. Now ask people what citizenship means. Many will say, being born here, or having papers. or voting. Those are pieces of the answer, but citizenship is more than legal status. Citizenship is membership in a political community. That membership has rights. It also has duties. You owe loyalty to the constitutional order. You owe respect for the rights of fellow citizens. You owe informed participation. You owe defense of the country when necessary. You owe jury service when called. You owe obedience to lawful authority. You owe resistance to unlawful authority. You owe the next generation something better than cynicism and debt. Citizenship isn't just receiving benefits, it's carrying obligation. But modern culture hates obligation. It loves identity. It loves emotion. It loves self-expression. It loves grievance. It loves personal branding. But obligation? Duty? Sacrifice? Those sound old. Those sound hard. Those sound like something a serious civilization would teach before handing people ballots. And there's the problem. A country can survive disagreement. A country can survive bad leaders. A country can survive recession. A country can survive scandal. A country can survive war. A country can survive cultural conflict. But a republic has a hard time surviving citizens who don't understand citizenship. Because if citizenship becomes consumption, politics becomes customer service. People start treating government like a complaint desk. I want this. I demand that. Fix my life. Punish my enemy. Pay my bills. Validate my identity. Silence that person. Erase that consequence. That's not Republican citizenship. That's dependency with voting rights. And politicians love dependency. Dependency is power. If a politician can convince you that your life depends on their office, they own a piece of you. If a party can convince you that your safety depends on its victory, it owns your fear. If an institution can convince you that your moral status depends on repeating its language, it owns your speech. If the state can convince you that rights come from government, it can convince you that rights can be adjusted for public need. That's why civic knowledge matters. A citizen who knows where rights come from is harder to control. A citizen who knows government is limited is harder to scare. A citizen who knows history is harder to manipulate. A citizen who knows the Constitution is harder to lie to. That's exactly why civic ignorance is useful to people seeking power. You also can't preserve the Constitution if you can't explain what it does. The Constitution isn't a poem. It's not a vibe. It's not a sacred charm. It's a governing framework. It creates institutions. It divides powers. It limits powers. It outlines processes. It protects rights. It gives the federal government certain powers and leaves others elsewhere. It can be amended, but not casually. It's built to survive passion by making passion move through structure. That's the genius of it. The Constitution doesn't assume people will stop being emotional. It assumes emotion must be slowed down before it becomes law. Modern people hate that because they think intensity equals truth. It doesn't. Being passionate doesn't make you correct. Being offended doesn't make you wise. Being angry doesn't make your policy good. Being scared doesn't make your solution constitutional. The Constitution exists partly because human beings are very good at feeling strongly and very bad at thinking clearly when doing it. That's why process matters. Process isn't boring. Process is civilization restraining impulse. The Declaration matters because it gives the moral foundation. The Constitution matters because it gives the structure. The Bill of Rights matters because it limits power against the person. Federalism matters because it prevents one national authority from swallowing every decision. Separation of powers matters because no branch should dominate. Checks and balances matter because ambition needs restraint. Elections matter because government requires consent. Courts matter because rights need protection from majorities. Local government matters because not every issue belongs in Washington. Civil society matters because government can't replace family, church, neighborhood, association, charity, and community without making people weaker. That's America. Not just a map, not just a military, not just an economy, not just a flag, a set of principles, institutions, habits, and inherited responsibilities. If citizens can't explain those things, then they're not preserving the republic, they're living off the leftovers. And yes, that includes conservatives. Don't get comfortable. This isn't an episode where conservatives get to sit back and nod like the stupid is only coming from the left. The left has its own civic rot. Absolutely. But the right has problems too. There are conservatives who can't explain the Constitution beyond shall not be infringed. There are conservatives who claim to love limited government until their leader controls the executive branch. There are conservatives who scream about federalism until a state does something they dislike. There are conservatives who defend free speech until the speech attacks them. There are conservatives who treat patriotism as loyalty to a politician instead of loyalty to the constitutional order. There are conservatives who wrap themselves in the flag while knowing almost nothing about the founding principles the flag is supposed to represent. That's not good enough. If your patriotism can't survive a civics test, it's decoration. If your constitutionalism vanishes when your side gains power, it's fake. If your love of country requires ignoring every failure, it's childish. If your defense of liberty only applies to your tribe, it's not liberty. Conservatives should be the adults in the room on this issue. That means actually knowing the inheritance, not just reacting to the left, not just owning the libs, not just posting memes, not just yelling communist at every policy you dislike. Know the principles, know the history, know the arguments, know the documents, know the failures, know the corrections, know what you're conserving. Because if you can't explain what you're conserving, you're not a conservative. You're a guy standing in front of a museum yelling at people to stay out while the roof caves in. The left needs to hear this too. If your critique of America requires you to ignore the principles that made your critique possible, you're not serious. If you use free speech to attack free speech, you're not serious. If you use constitutional protections to demand a weaker constitution, you're not serious. If you call everything fascism while demanding censorship and state coercion, you're not serious. If you think socialism means compassion and capitalism means greed, you're not serious. If you think identity categories replace individual rights, you're not serious. If you think equality under law is less important than engineered group outcomes, you're not serious. If you think the Declaration is worthless because the men who wrote it were flawed, you don't understand history. You understand condemnation. Those aren't the same thing. A serious left-wing critique would know the American tradition deeply and argue from within or against it honestly. A serious critique would admit that the Declaration's principles fueled abolition and civil rights. A serious critique would admit constitutional rights protect dissenters. A serious critique would admit concentrated state power has a bloody record. A serious critique would admit human beings don't become angels when they join the correct movement. But modern left-wing discourse often skips that. It jumps straight to accusation. America is oppressive. The Constitution is outdated. The founders were villains. Rights are power structures. Speech is harm. Opponents are fascists. Institutions must be transformed. And then they act confused when people say, no thanks. Here's the standard. If you want to change the country, understand it first. If you want to criticize the founding, read the founding documents first. If you want to attack capitalism, learn economics first. If you want to praise socialism, study socialist regimes first. If you want to call someone fascist, learn what fascism is first. If you want to defend democracy, understand constitutional republicanism first. If you want to discuss rights, understand where rights come from first. If you want to call yourself a patriot, learn the country first. This shouldn't be controversial, but in modern America, asking people to know what they're talking about is treated like oppression. Too bad! Know something anyway. A republic isn't inherited the way you inherit furniture. You don't just receive it and sit on it. A republic is inherited more like a weapon, a duty station, or a family name. You maintain it. You learn it. You respect what it can do. You understand what happens if you mishandle it. You don't leave it lying around for fools to play with. And you sure as hell don't hand it over to people who hate it because they never bothered to understand it. America's 250th anniversary should have been a moment of national recommitment, not blind celebration, not fake unity, not sanitized history, not propaganda, a recommitment. A moment to say, this country was founded on principles that remain true even when the people failed them. This system was designed to restrain power because human beings are dangerous with power. This liberty is rare. This inheritance is costly. This republic requires citizens, not spectators, not consumers, not mobs, not activists with no memory, not partisans with no principles, citizens. That's the final point. Citizenship is active. If you don't know the Declaration, read it. If you don't know the Constitution, read it. If you don't understand the Bill of Rights, study it. If you can't explain separation of powers, learn it. If you can't explain federalism, learn it. If you can't explain why rights apply to people you dislike, sit with that until you can. If you get all your political knowledge from influencers, stop poisoning yourself. If your favorite commentator never corrects your side, find better sources. If your entire political worldview fits on a meme, throw it away and start over. If you're raising kids, teach them the country. Not worship, not hatred. Teach them the country. Teach them what was promised. Teach them what was violated. Teach them what was corrected. Teach them what remains unfinished. Teach them why liberty matters. Teach them why rights require duty. Teach them why government must be limited. Teach them why courage matters. Teach them why gratitude and cynicism can exist in the same mind. That's citizenship. That's how a republic survives. The public wasn't built for stupid people. It was built for free people. But free people must be serious people. They must know the freedom. They must know what freedom is. They must know what government is. They must know what power does. They must know what rights require. They must know what history warns. They must know what citizenship demands. Without that, freedom becomes noise. Rights become demands. Politics becomes tribal warfare. Education becomes programming. Media becomes manipulation. And a republic becomes a house occupied by people who can't explain who built it, why it was built, what holds it up, or why knocking down the support beams might be a bad idea. You can't preserve what you can't explain. And if America wants to survive another 250 years, it had better start explaining itself again. One final book plug before the outro. The Unmaking of the American Citizen, Neoliberalism, Identity Politics, and the Conservative Renewal deals directly with this episode's central problem. The citizen has been reduced, managed, categorized, marketed to, divided, and trained to think less like a member of a republic and more like a demographic unit with a grievance profile. That's not an accident. The Unmaking of the American Citizen is about how that happened and what renewal requires. If this episode made sense to you, that book belongs on your list. The Unmaking of the American Citizen by Shawn Armstrong. Now let's close this thing out. Here's what I want you to take from this episode. The problem isn't that Americans disagree. Disagreement is normal. Disagreement is healthy. Disagreement is built into free government. The problem is disagreement without knowledge, passion without understanding, rights without responsibility, patriotism without memory, criticism without context, education without wisdom, politics without principle. That combination is dangerous because an ignorant citizen isn't neutral. An ignorant citizen becomes available to propaganda, available to demagogues, available to institutional manipulation, available to tribal loyalty, available to panic, available to every political salesman who knows how to push the right emotional button. That's why civic knowledge matters, not because everyone needs to become a scholar, but because self-government requires enough knowledge to avoid becoming someone else's tool. The 4th of July isn't just a party. The Declaration isn't just a museum object. The Constitution isn't just legal scenery. Rights aren't just slogans. Citizenship isn't just a status. A republic isn't just something you live in. It's something you carry. And if you refuse to carry it, someone else will carry power for you. You may not like who picks it up. For 250 years, America has been an argument about liberty, an argument about equality, an argument about power, an argument about citizenship, an argument about law, an argument about what principles mean when flawed people try to live under them. That argument isn't over. It never was. But you can't participate in the argument if you don't know the terms. You can't defend the inheritance if you never read the documents. You can't correct the country if you don't understand the standard. You can't save a republic by feeling strongly at it. You have to know something. You have to do something. You have to become the kind of citizen a free country requires. So read, study, teach your kids, challenge your own side. Stop rewarding stupid commentary. Stop confusing outrage with courage. Stop treating ignorance with authenticity. Stop letting political parties define your principles. Stop letting media manufacture your emotions. Stop letting activists rewrite your vocabulary. Stop letting institutions convince you that citizenship is too complicated for ordinary people. It's not. But it does require effort. And effort is apparently where modern civilization keeps tripping over its own shoelaces. The Republic wasn't built for stupid people. It was built for citizens. So be one. This has been Shawn, Thinking Out Loud. I'm Shawn Armstrong. Until next time, think clearly, speak plainly, and stop letting people who can't explain the country tell you how to rebuild it. Before you go, check out the books behind the ideas in this episode: Reclaiming Our Ideals, Consent of the Governed, Dismantling the Republic, and the Unmaking of the American Citizen. If you want more than slogans, read the work. Civilization, tragically, still requires effort.